Okay, so now I've set my question up. I've got the data structures, the variables, the constants, and the arrays I think I need. And remember, this might change as you go along and you start answering the question and you realize you need something else. So don't worry too much if you don't have everything that you need. But I've got enough to get me started. Now I start reading the question. So at the bottom it says write a program that meets the following requirements: calculates the combined total mark for each student for the subjects, calculates the average mark, and then it outputs the information, and then it does a little calculation at the bottom. Now, what the exam would have done here is they're telling you the order in which you can work your way through the program. You can't really do the average until you find the total mark, so you have to do that first. You can't output name, combined mark, average, or grade unless you do the first two. So you can start to work your way through each of the bullet points, and that gives you an automatic sort of flow in terms of the way that you need to work. Now on the right hand side over here, just for the sake of saving a bit of space and giving you a bit of clarity in terms of what my program is doing, I'm just going to get rid of some of my comments and the print statements which I was used for testing. I'm just going to keep it as my 1D array, which is the name or the names of the students. I've got my 2D array with the marks. I've initialized a few things over here. I've got a couple of constants as well over here. I'll leave that for use later on. And then I've got the class size and I've got the subject number, which I've calculated. And then I've got an array that I think I need in order for me to store the total, which will then allow me to work out the average marks. So let's work our way through the first one. So calculate the combined total mark for each student for all of their subjects. Yeah, and I'm going to store that into this array called total scores. Now at the moment, I know that each student has done 3 tests: 21, 25, and 28. So what I'm trying to do is add 21, 25, and 28 up and store it in index 0 for Bob. So Bob index 0 in student name is that. His first row of information is his score, and in total scores index 0, it will hold his total score for the 3 tests. The second index, or index number 1, would be Lisa's total score, which would be the addition of that, and then so on and so forth. So let's try and see how this works. Now, whenever we're working with a 2D array, we need 2 for loops. The outer for loop does each one. So the outer for loop, the first time around, will do that. The second outer for loop the second time will do that. Third, fourth, and fifth time. So it'll go 5 times around. But then the inner for loop will do that, and then it will look at that, and then it will look at that. So we did an outer for loop working 5 times, and then an inner for loop working 3 times. Now, when I say that, you might start to realize yourself, okay, we actually have this. We have class size, which is a variable which stores the length of student name 5, which is the amount of times we need to work on the outer for loop. And you might think, okay, well, subject number holds 3, and that's the inner for loop. So what we're going to do is we can use the 2 variables, class size and subject number, to control our outer loop and to control our inner loop. And every time we're working with arrays, we use a for loop simply because we know how many iterations we're going to need to go through in advance. Yeah, not like a while or a repeat loop. So I'm going to need a couple of counters. So let's do count outer for the outer for loop, and let's store that as 0. And I'm going to need another count for my inner for loop. So let's call that count inner. And let's also initialize that to 0 to begin with. So they're my counters for my for loops. Now let's write out the outer for loop. So for count outer, and I want this to happen from 0 to 5. So that would be the class size. Okay, now because I'm starting off on 0, I don't even actually need to include the 0. I can just say for counting around to class size, which means do this the number of times class size is. Now, what do I want to do the number of times class size is? I want to do something 3 times. I want to add up 3 numbers. So I'm going to do a for count inner. Now I can't use the same count variable because at one point in time, count outer is going to go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's going to stop at 5. And the inner loop is going to go 0, 1, 2, and then it's going to stop at 3. So they're doing different things. And this is going to work 3 times, which is going to be subject number. Okay, and I got my colon there. So now I've got the outer loop and the inner loop set up. So what do I want to do? Well, I want to add something into total scores. So something's going to go in total scores. But total scores is a 1D array, so I need to determine what index it's going to be in. So the first time around the loop, I want it to store into index 0. The second time around the loop, I want it to store in index 2. And I want to do this for the 5 students. So what goes up from 0 up to 4 and stops at 5? Well, count outer does that. So I can just use my count outer variable to say do this for the 5 indexes that we have inside our total scores. Well, what do I want to do inside there? Well, I guess I want to, what's going to happen is the first time around the loop, it's going to take 21. The second time around, it's going to add 21 to 25, which will give me 46. And then the third time around, it's going to add 28 to 46, which will give me the final total. So I need to make sure that whatever's inside of total scores, count outer, we don't get rid of that, because that's going to be, every time you iterate around the loop, it's going to hold the running total, yeah? So I'm going to keep what's in there, and then I need to add something from student mark. So I need to add student mark. And remember, whenever we're working with 2D arrays, we have 2 indexes. So how am I going to get to the 2 indexes? Well, the outer loop is going to look at row 0. So I need row 0 to stay the same all the way through. So row 0, the first time around the loop, is going to be count outer. So I can use count outer for that to stay as 0 all the way through. But this is going to change. The inner loop is going to be 0, then it's going to be 1, and then it's going to be 2, then it's going to stop. So I know that that happens with the inner count. So I would use count inner for the inner section of the loop. So what's happening over here? Let me just explain, because it can get a little bit complicated. The first time we run around the 2D array, it starts off on 0. So it starts off on the 0 index. It then goes into the inner loop, and it does this 3 times, because count inner in range subject number is equals 3. So do this 3 times. What does it do 3 times? It takes whatever's in total scores count outer, which is initially nothing, it's 0. And then it adds 0 onto that because it's initially 0, and then it takes the first one, so it adds 21 to it. So the first time around the inner loop, it stores 21 inside of here. Then it does it a second time. The second time 21's in there, but now count in has moved to 1, so now it's moved to the second index, which matches up with the count inner over here. So it adds 25 to 21, and it stores it in total scores count outer, which is still the first index or index number 0. It then does it a third time, because we know subject number happens 3 times, and it adds 28, and then it ends, and then it goes back to the outer loop. The outer loop now changes to the next index, so now it looks at the second row, and it does exactly the same. In the second row, it adds 44, then it adds 49, and then it adds 47, and it will do that for the next outer loop 3, outer loop 4, and outer loop 5, and then it stops, yeah? Now, just to test that it works okay, let me just print it off. So let me just print off total scores. Okay, and what I should have in total scores is a 1D array with the total of all of these. So let's have a go at that. And I have 74, so 21, 25 plus 28 is 74. The second time, 44, 49, 47 is 140, and so on and so forth. So now I know my 2D array works. It's going around, and it's adding up each row, and it's adding it into this array called total scores. So that video is all about how you total data that is held within a 2D array, and we store that in a separate 1D array.